Hello. As this is the first time that Wolfians have been gathered en masse since the last conference in Cincinnati in 2019, Jean Moorcroft Wilson and I thought that it might be appropriate to offer up a tribute to the late Cecil Woolf. Cecil died 2 years ago, the day after the last conference ended, and to say that he was on the minds of many of us there that weekend is an understatement. What follows is a collection of photos and short reminiscences by several of us who were lucky enough to know him and love him. Jean and I hope that this gives a sense of who Cecil was and that it honors his memory.
I have many lovely memories of Cecil Woolf. The first that comes to mind is the party that Cecil and Jean Moorcroft Wilson generously arranged at their own home, 1 Mornington Place, during the amazing 2004 Back to Bloomsbury conference at the University of London, organized by Gina Potts and Lisa Shariari. Swarms of happy people crowded into the beautiful small back garden on that warm, sunny evening, and Cecil, with his sweet smile and his witty, charismatic style of conversing, was delightfully engaged with everyone all at once. Another vivid memory is the banquet at the 2007 Miami, Ohio Wolf Conference organized by Madeline Detloff and Diane Royer. My recollection is that Cecil spoke eloquently of his memories of Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf, and his audience was spellbound. At the end of his presentation, he was surrounded by ecstatic Woolfians, and there were many hugs and much laughter. At the Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania Wolf Conference in 2015, hosted by Julie Vanderveer, I recall at the end of the conference, Cecil and Jean, in her stunning full regalia, posing for a photo on a patio. But alas, the photographs from these events have vanished. A memory that I particularly cherish is associated with the 2017 Wolf Conference at the University of Reading, hosted by Nicola Wilson, where I was able to hang out casually with Cecil and Jean at various venues, whether at the display of Bloomsbury heritage booklets or at the campus pub, and chat with them about everything from publishing and politics to Siamese cats. During the conference, Cecil delivered a brilliant talk on his pamphlet, The Other Boy, at the Hogarth Press, Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf as I remember them, and cut the celebratory Hogarth Press centenary cake. Jean and Cecil had invited me to visit them the day after the conference, but I was boarding a plane that Sunday. I wish I had planned to stay a few days in London. It was the last time I ever saw Cecil. Sadly, in 2018, at the Wolf Conference at the University of Kent, hosted by Derek Ryan, Cecil could not participate as one of Judith Allen's Wolf Society players. Mark Hussey read Cecil's selected passage at the banquet. In 2019, at Drew Shannon's Wolf Conference held at Mount St. Joseph in Cincinnati, Karen Levenbach hosted a panel dedicated on a discussion of Cecil's role as a publisher and invited me to speak along with Paula Maggio, Lois Gilmore, and Todd Avery. The panel convened on June 8th, and we shared our presentations published later in issue 95 of the Virginia Woolf Miscellany. Cecil was still present in the living world that day, and that night at the banquet, the beautiful poster from the conference was passed from table to table so that Wolfians could honor Cecil by signing it. On Monday, June 10th, Cecil passed away. Paula combined the many heartfelt tributes to Cecil for the very same issue of the Miscellany. The numerous Wolf Conference related encounters with Cecil were very meaningful for me, but those are not the only memorable interactions. In 2014, Cecil invited me to submit my paper on Septimus Warren Smith from the Wolf Writing the World Conference, organized by Diana Swanson and Pamela Cowhey. Working with Cecil to publish it as a booklet added a new and very rewarding dimension to our exchanges. Each and every one of Cecil's emails was amusing and supportive and affectionate, and his gentle nudges, kind reminders, and infinite patience were extraordinary. When the pamphlet was finally in print, he mailed me 7 copies in a box addressed in his handwriting. The box contained a small taped packet with my name and his initials on it. He and Jean also posed for a photograph with me, holding a copy at the 2015 conference. I was in London in mid-June 2019 on a research grant, and thus I was able to attend Cecil's funeral on June 24th. I was the only person from the United States who was present. The beautiful service at Golders Green transitioned into a gathering at 1 Mornington Place. It was an incredible honor to be there. Cecil will always be a deeply beloved presence in my life. I am profoundly grateful that I knew him, and I am grateful to have been invited to honor him by contributing this remembrance.
Visiting Cecil at Mornington Place. Books are piled high, way up the stairs when you climb to the second floor Bloomsbury parlor with Cecil. On your way, you pass a wall of Jean's elegant brimmed hats, pink and red, feathers fluttering. Books and feathers. I can't think of Cecil without Jean. He was a modest, energetic, and tough-minded bookman, a gentleman, a publisher. Like Leonard, he said, I published my wife's first book. When they first met in the British Library, he urged Jean to write her thesis about World War I poets that led to her career as a biographer. He believed that his imprint was, quote, a very personal business. His life was indelibly marked by the Great War, and it influenced what he published. His uncle Cecil and his father Philip shared an interest in horses and joined the Inns of Court Regiment before the war. And when the war broke out, they entered the 12th Hussars Special Reserve. It was a unit that was sent to France, and in December 1918, battling under ceaseless attack, a shell exploded between them, fatally wounding Cecil and badly injuring Philip, his father. Cecil confided that his father survived, but never fully recovered from the war. And Virginia remarked in a visit to him in Fishmonger's Hall, a recovery facility, that Philip seemed stunned, not fully feeling, probably experiencing what we now call PTSD. War then became a presence in Cecil's young life, his uncle Cecil, his namesake. Leonard Woolf memorialized his brother Cecil, along with Virginia, in publishing 15 of his poems in a Hogarth Press monograph, April 1919. Just as Leonard remembered the war dead in this monograph, so did Cecil in creating a World War I poet series under his imprint, edited by Jean, who continued to write and publish several highly praised biographies of the war poets, Isaac Rosenberg, Siegfried Sassoon, Robert Graves, with Cecil's steady encouragement, literary acumen, and support. It was delightful having literary conversations in the evening at their home with Jean's tasty roast and vegetables, roast beef, Cecil's favorite, the kitchen filled with warm smells, and the meal served on the wooden Hogarth press table of Virginia and Leonard. His hearty appreciation of food could not escape notice, and always the generous host, he kept one's glass full and urged the sampling of his favorite Stilton or a delectable chocolate. Piled high in the adjoining room were Cecil's overflowing desks, papers, books, folders, proofs, out of which miraculously emerged Cecil Woolf publications, notably the series of attractive Bloomsbury Heritage booklets that now number 80, reflecting the original perspectives of the members of Virginia Woolf Society and elsewhere, and importantly, carrying on Virginia and Leonard's Hogarth legacy. Generous and encouraging, Cecil often had a quizzical look and tilted his head sideways when listening. Or, playful, a wry smile would appear as he listened to one of Jean's strong opinions, proud in his shy way of her pluckiness. Or sometimes he would turn his head, alert to your idea, look at you directly through his horn-rimmed glasses, and say, why don't you write that?
I'm delighted to make a tribute to Cecil Woolf, and it seems incredible to me that it's 2 years now since he died. The time has passed, and the 10th of June 2019 seems like yesterday, but it wasn't. Cecil's originality, his quiet presence in our lives, will stay in our minds, even though he's not here. When I think of Cecil, I see him standing beside Jean Moorcroft Wilson with a pile of books beside them. He's smiling, his warm, wry, lopsided smile, looking slightly quizzical. If he asked a question, it was always very pointed, carefully phrased, and he'd look as if the answer was truly appreciated, truly treasured. I appreciated his care, his great integrity, and his sense of humour. I remember him as an attentive listener. He was interested in everyone's story, and he was generous with his time. He wasn't a showy person, quite self-deprecating, in fact, but he could take control of a room of Woolf scholars without having to raise his voice or impose himself. He had strongly held views, but I don't think I've ever known someone less judgmental than Cecil Woolf. I met Cecil in 2004 at the Back to Bloomsbury conference in London. It was my first International Woolf conference, and as a newcomer to the Mrs. Woolf party, I felt a little bit overwhelmed. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, and I didn't. I was a little nervous, but at some point I found myself next to Cecil, and he introduced himself and started to ask questions about me and the work that I was doing, the research that I was doing. When the conference was over, I found myself accepting an invitation to go to One Mornington Place. And this was a smaller party. It was a more manageable party. And I was generously welcomed there, and on subsequent occasions. We kept in touch by letter, and Cecil encouraged me to publish versions of Julia, 5 biographical constructions of Julia Jackson, Duckworth, Stephen. With him. And the Bloomsbury Heritage series, I know, gave writers and scholars of Woolf and Bloomsbury the chance to create short monographs under tactful and generous guidance. Many of those at this Woolf conference in 2021 will also have been offered the support of Cecil Woolf Publishers. I had been transcribing Hyde Park Gate News at the British Library, and it was Cecil who suggested that I should contact Angelica Garnett and Olivia Bell about how best to go about publishing the first edition of the juvenile writings, the newspaper of the Stephen children. And Cecil's interest was genuine and altruistic. I've kept the letters and the handmade Christmas cards that I received over the years, and I treasure a book that he sent me inscribed with a considerate personal message. I remember his kindness, I remember his modesty, his devotion to his family. Last year I was glad that he hadn't lived his extraordinary, full and fascinating life with the threat of COVID-19. But I also wished he had been able to meet his baby grandson, Ludovic Cecil. His loss is felt hugely by his family and the very many others with whom he shared his wit, his creativity, and his intelligence. And the sun is setting here in Suffolk. I want to raise a glass to Cecil, the man, and to what he contributed to the Woolf community. And I know that very many people listening to this have a great deal to owe to Cecil Woolf.
Hello. I want to pay tribute to my friend and my publisher, Cecil Woolf, by reading from the work of his uncle and namesake, Cecil Nathan Sidney Woolf, the young scholar, horseman, poet, and graduate of Trinity College, Cambridge. He was killed in the Great War at the Battle of Cambrai in 1917 by a shell that also injured his brother Philip Woolf. Philip survived the war to become the father of the Cecil Woolf we all cherish. Cecil kindly gave me a photocopy of the very rare volume of his uncle's poems, edited by his father for the Hogarth Press in 1918. I shared with Cecil the century-old TLS review, which I unearthed and which he'd not seen, and which describes his uncle's poetry as a rung in a Jacob's ladder that may someday lead to unimagined heavens of poetic beauty. I know Cecil was thinking of republishing the volume with additional poems by his father. He helped me to see Jacob's Room in a new light and Woolf's composite portrait of Jacob as owing something to his namesake, his uncle. Philip wrote of his brother, "He loved learning and art well, but men and horses better." Himself a brilliant scholar, he held brilliancy in small esteem. He valued deeds above words and prized honesty before all things. I wonder if that Cecil was as much good fun and sparkling company as his erudite and generous nephew. How I have adored carousing in June at a Woolf conference anywhere in the company of Cecil and Jean. Here's to Cecil's continuing presence. The masquerade. The players in the masquerade, each guest beneath a mask, a lover. The climax of their escapade was midnight when they did uncover. One woman found her exiled brother. Was he she dallied with the evening through? One man had sighed unto his mother, and all found something for the dawn to rue. O witless players in the masquerade, keep on your masks until the whole thing's played. 1913. When I desired her fit to split my liver, she laughed and called me love. She laughed and called my love a little thing, the effect of spring. Lately, she came and asked me to forgive her. I said, my love's a little thing. Remember, we're in December. Tumuli. 1. On a weak man. Constant only to cowardice, I loved the truth which I did not tell. Born for virtue, I lived in vice. I longed for heaven, I am in hell. 2. On a philanthropist. Living, you lay awake, and heard while others slept, a whole world weep. Now you are dead, not even praise should break your well-earned sleep. Epilogue to Sonnets to J. These few sad sonnets need an epilogue, though, as I hope, it's only the first act, not the whole play, that ends here with the fact that we have parted. The old easy jog of Cambridge days is no good for the fog of London or the world, whose ways exact more horsemanship than when our reins lay slacked on horses we'd no need to spur or flog. That was the first act. We could ride together and think of nothing but of talk and laughter, an eye of love through weeks of summer weather. Now comes the second act. We still are friends, and I your lover. But when the second act ends, where will you be? Where I? And what comes after? Here's to all the talk and laughter with Cecil Woolf. Thank you.
Sometimes when you meet someone, things just click. And that's how it was when I first met Cecil Woolf in 2007 at the Woolf Conference at Miami University of Ohio. Drew Shannon had pointed him out to me. I was a newbie in Woolf circles, didn't know anyone. And Drew kind of took me under his wing and pointed out Cecil from a distance. And I thought, wow, I have to meet that man. So I sought him out the next day at his book table at the conference where he was selling his Bloomsbury Heritage books. And we struck up a conversation. And I just felt like, in a way, like we'd known each other for a long time, even though we just met. But I think a lot of people felt that way about Cecil. He was so gracious, so kind, just so nice to everyone that at every Woolf conference he was sought out by people. He would be surrounded by people, and everyone wanted to hang out with Cecil. And I sure was one of them. By the end of that conference, I had pitched an idea to Cecil about Woolf and Weather, and kind of stupidly said to him, no one's written about that. And he said, yes, I know. And by the end of the conference, he said he wanted me to write up my bit for his Bloomsbury Heritage series, and of course I was thrilled. And from then on, we had struck up a correspondence, and exchanged letters, exchanged emails, sought each other out at Woolf conferences, and he published my monograph in 2009 on the topic of Woolf and Weather called Reading the Skies in Virginia Woolf, and we did other work for him as well. But I guess that one of the best days of my life was touring Bloomsbury with Cecil. We walked around Bloomsbury in London, and I think that was in 2016, for 6 hours. And that man was in his late 80s and never faltered, never wanted to sit down and take a break. In fact, was constantly asking me if I was okay, if I could go on. He was even carrying a backpack. We stopped for lunch and we stopped for tea, and we just walked all over Bloomsbury together. And I have to say that was one of the most special days of my life. I'll never forget it. Also, the invitations that he and Jean Moorcroft Wilson, his wife, extended to me whenever I was in London to come for dinner at their flat, to join them for a party of Woolf people who were there for the conference. All of those were so special too. Just to sit there in their company and enjoy their very, very gracious hospitality and listen to their witty conversation and all of the experiences that they shared, from their favorite movies to people they knew to things they'd read. It was just some of the most special evenings of my life. And I miss him. It's been 2 years now, and it's hard to believe we're not going to see Cecil Woolf at the next Woolf conference when we're all together again. So I think it's great that we're sharing our stories about Cecil so that we can hand them down to the next generation of Woolf scholars, because he was a special, special man who will be missed by many, including me.
When I think now about Cecil Woolf, that beloved man, the great gift to the Woolf community, I see a handsome, witty and charming fellow with a penknife in his pocket. I remember dinners, visits to Mornington Place, a lot of fabulous gossip and great fun and insight. But in a short tribute, I'm going to focus just on a couple of stories and memories. Beginning with how we met. 2005 in the foyer of Senate House in London, 2005, that's right, the Woolf Conference. I think that's right, yeah. And I saw a scene which I felt I had to intervene in. I don't know if those of you remember a book that a woman called Irene Coates wrote called Who's Afraid of Leonard Woolf. I had met this woman in Australia. She was a painter who was in a group with my sister, who's also a painter, and I knew of this book. But there she was, bold as anything, trying to press it on to Cecil. Well, that was intolerable. There he was, this very polite man, trying to fend off a woman accusing his uncle of murder. Well, I'm sorry, but I intervened, and in that moment, or in those few moments of intervention, verbal intervention on my part, Cecil and I really bonded. And from that moment on, I felt that we had some special insight into the complexity of things he had to face in the Woolf community. Irene Coates never appeared again. I don't believe that book was ever talked about again. It was called Who's Afraid of Leonard Woolf. It was quite odious, and I don't think those depths have been plumbed since. My second story is about anti-Semitism. I decided not to dodge this one because I think for Cecil it was a huge issue, spanning first the Birmingham conference and then at Fordham in New York, and involving Ruth Gruber, the amazing Ruth Gruber. I remember a dinner, the Woolf dinner at Birmingham, during which there was a very unpleasant moment of anti-Semitism, where Cecil simply left. Ever the gentleman, but of firm principles, he was left really with no alternative but to walk out. As I remember, Ruth Gruber had fallen asleep, so she didn't leave, but they, I think, had already had some conversations, and these continued then at Fordham. And I remember at the amazing dinner at Fordham, which was very rowdy, Cecil and Ruth sat together, and I tried to film it. It was too noisy for it ever to have come out very well, but they tolerated this and had a very, very long conversation, which I was privy to, which was pretty amazing, about anti-Semitism in Woolf's own work during Woolf's life, and subsequently through some of the work and in the conferences. And it was a really amazing moment of truth-telling, which I think for the Woolf Conference was an important undercurrent of and realisation that we tread on complex territory, and Cecil knew that always. He didn't ever push it in our face, but if you chose to have conversation with him, it was there. And it's ongoing. It's not like it's something we can just sweep aside. My other memories involve those annual delicious times that Jean and Cecil and I would be in the trade and art area, and we just had the best time. I adored those times at the conference. Lots of gossip, especially about Americans, and I'll never talk about that, but we laughed and loved being outsiders of that milieu. and yet adoring it all. But one of the things that I most still see is Jean and Cecil in 2011 at the Glasgow conference, when I cast them officially as the audience in the pageant that I produced. Never will I forget the delight that I felt and the joy on Cecil's face as he performed his part as the general in the audience, the retired general, and endlessly popping up and down and yelling out, "What about the army? What about the army?" It was such a delight in the middle of a lot of chaos, and I'll never forget it. And I was deeply thankful to hear Jean, the wonderful Jean, the great performer Jean, who I hope will be performing again, for the special, extraordinary link they made between us and that past, that deep past that we blunder through. In any case, Cecil and Jean, I love you, I miss you, and I know you're carrying on whatever it is you're doing. All the best. Bye.
I've often said that those of us who knew Cecil Woolf had a huge speed bump to get over when we first met him. And that speed bump was the fact that he knew Virginia Woolf. There was an odd groupie sort of feeling that one had when one first met him, I think. It must have been like meeting one of the Beatles or something. There was some sort of just buzz, kinetic sort of thing going on where you really couldn't help think about the history and everyone he knew. But happily, that wore off really, really quickly. I mean, within 2 minutes, that became the least of it. And what I came to love Cecil for was everything that he was, not who he knew. His wit, his charm, his energy, his kindness, his consideration to people. I met him first in 2004 at the Back to Bloomsbury conference, and after that we corresponded pretty ceaselessly. We stayed in each other's homes, we had meals together, we took walks together, we watched movies together, and he and Jean Moorcroft Wilson entertained successive batches of students that I would bring over to England, bringing out all kinds of Bloomsbury artifacts for the students to see. One of the things I loved most about Cecil was that underneath his English gentleman exterior was a wicked, wicked sense of humor. He would often deliberately whisper things to me in my ear at inopportune moments to make me giggle, and I would try to maintain my composure, not always successfully. He also seemed to know everyone. When you'd have conversations with him, he would drop names in that formed yet more speed bumps that you had to get over. He would say things like, "I was talking to Quentin Crisp in Regent's Park, and he said to me," and you have to sort of process that. And he would say, "Jean, what year was it that we had Ted Heath over for dinner?" And I would say, "Edward Heath, the Prime Minister?" And so many Bloomsbury anecdotes that many of us have traded around for years. Stories you'd never heard before, and stories which he thankfully finally committed to paper in one of the Bloomsbury Heritage monographs. There are some isolated moments that stand out for me. One is I was stranded in London one evening on my way to Spain, and I didn't have a place to stay. And they very kindly fetched me at the Mornington Crescent tube station, shuttled me over to their house. Jean fed me scrambled eggs, and Cecil calmed my hysterics and told me everything would be fine, and they gave me a bed for the night. I also remember his disdain when he found out that I actually liked Leonard Woolf's The Wise Virgins. He looked at me and said, "Oh, come on. How can you? There were many nights sitting at our dining table here in Cincinnati in the evenings after the Georgetown conference, drinking wine and eating cheese and listening to his stories of the literary life in London. On that same trip, I remember watching the Stephen Frears movie The Queen with him and Jean on our sofa, and of Cecil saying, Helen Mirren looks more like the Queen than the Queen. And speaking of movies, I was always amused and somewhat bewildered by Cecil's fondness for Al Pacino. he had he had huge chunks of the movie Scent of a Woman committed to memory. And when I found that he had never seen Dog Day Afternoon, I was appalled. And so I went out and bought the DVD for him, and we all sat down and watched it together. And when Al Pacino was running around outside the bank screaming, Attica, Attica, I remember Cecil shaking his head saying, only in America, only in America. I also interviewed him at one point about his life in publishing. And after only about 45 minutes of this, he looked at me and he said, haven't you had enough? Aren't you bored? No, Cecil, I was never bored. I could never have been bored by you if you tried to make me bored. There was not a boring bone in your body. We lost a very great man when we lost Cecil Woolf 2 years ago, and I miss him all the time. But I feel very, very lucky to have known him as well as I did, and to have shared so many amazing evenings, days, nights, walks, meals, movies with him. I miss him a lot.
As Cecil used to say when people asked him about his uncle, Leonard Woolf, how do you sum up someone as many-sided as that? The simple answer is you can't. And so I have chosen to conclude this tribute to Cecil with his favourite poem at the end of his 92 years, which reveals, I believe, so much about him. Cecil was a great lover of poetry of all kinds. He treasured Shakespeare's sonnets in particular. Let me not to the marriage of two minds, he was convinced had been written for us, as most people who are happily married do. Donne's love poetry, Blake's songs of innocence and experience, Keats's odes, Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach, and almost anything by Yeats. T.S. Eliot, E.E. Cummings, and Dylan Thomas. He had a special place in his heart in Covafe's Ithaca, which he discovered in later years. But one poem became especially dear to his fighting spirit as he grew frailer. Tennyson's account of the aging Ulysses' rebellion against the infirmities of old age. He would often ask me to read it to him, which I do now with one small omission. It little profits that an idle king by this still hearth, among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone. On shore, and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vexed the dim sea. I am become a name for always roving with a hungry heart. Much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honoured of them all. And drunk delight of battle with my peers far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am a part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untravelled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use. As though to breathe were life, life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things. And violet were, for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself. And this grey spirit, like a sinking star, yearning in desire, to follow knowledge like a sinking star, beyond the utmost bound of human thought. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail. There gloom the dark, broad seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honour and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note, may yet be done. Not unbecoming men that strove with gods. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Perhaps the last word of all must go to Virginia Woolf, who expresses so beautifully the hope we cling to, that this bodily death is not the end, whatever our beliefs. I'm thinking of a short passage in Mrs. Dalloway, in which Clarissa looks back on her youthful relationship with Peter, sent to me by Mark Hussey shortly after Cecil died. Somehow in the streets of London, on the ebb and flow of things, here, there, she survived, Peter survived, lived in each other, she being part, she was positive, of the trees at home, of the house there, ugly, rambling all to bits and pieces it was, part of people she had never met. And finally, for Cecil himself, Cecil's own words again about Leonard Woolf, a rare soul gone forever.